Good morning, everybody. So glad to be here. I'm glad that many of you were able to make it back. I know that we had an issue last week. So, I guess since then, I made the decision actually that I was going to get certified on diversity and inclusion. So I finished my course last night and I have to take an exam. And so I actually will be certified as a yellow belt on diversity and inclusion. It's a Six Sigma course. Actually, there were some good that came out of that whole debacle that we had a couple of weeks ago. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because I know that it is something that did occur. And, it's just kind of one of those things that's unfortunate. So with that, we are going to move into this presentation. Um, Here we go. So, and I made some changes to the slides just because I know that some of you are back for the second time, so I didn't want to do exactly a repeat. But you may think in terms of why emotional intelligence in the business world. And if you look at a lot of different, documentations, articles, and things, emotional intelligence is kind of the hot commodity. According to Forbes, according to Future Jobs, emotional intelligence is one of the top 10 most needed skills in the industry by 2020. It's 2020 now. That continues to be. I think some of that is because of AI, machine learning, a lot of technology, and you need people to have the ability to interpret the data, but also be able to communicate it effectively. And then the impacts of cognitive bias can be mitigated by working on our emotional intelligence skills. So you see all the things that are going on in the world today. We all have biases. It's just, we are a part of our environment. So that's why we have these biases. And so by having better emotional intelligence, we can be more effective at that. And then the reality of it is work environments more collaborative, more people are working together. And a lot of companies, it's very, very team oriented. And then 4 out of 5 managers in healthcare feel like their day-to-day job is burning them out. And I'm sure that's also in other industries. I know that people that I continue to talk with in pharma talk about working more hours. People generally will try to work things around. They have children at home, so there are a lot of stresses. So more and more people are feeling burned out, and I think that's going to continue to happen. And then as we continue to adapt to this remote working scenarios, EI is going to be more difficult to cultivate because it's difficult when you're not face to face with people. And even though we're on camera, a lot of times people aren't even using cameras. So it's very, very difficult to communicate effectively. So those are all the things that impact emotional intelligence. I know the last time we got together, if you talk about some of the use cases of why emotional intelligence, these are just some of the things that you communicated to me last time. COVID-19, diversity inclusion, remote team, high potential, conflict resolution, people development, customer service, going back to work, leadership competencies, culture and engagement, succession planning, new managers, and emerging leaders. Those are just some of the things that you gave me. And I'm sure that this list is endless. Hopefully all of you have your cell phones with you because I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a poll. So if there's information there on the screen, if you want to join by text, you just basically text me, Keith Willis, 929 to that number there, and then basically text in. And then what I'm looking for is just one word: why emotional intelligence. It could be anything. It could be something from that list. It could be something that you think of personally. So what we're going to do is we're gonna create a word cloud. I'll give you a few moments. If you're having problems, just send me a message in chat. I don't have any results as of yet, so I don't know if anybody's typing anything in. Okay, I've got one. There's one word right there. Any others? There we go. Make sales effective. Relationship, sales. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for participating in the poll. There will be some other polls that you'll have a chance to answer some questions, but these are all important things when it comes to emotional intelligence. I like to think of it as the head and the heart working together. So if you think in terms of emotional intelligence from a leadership standpoint, it gives you the ability to be able to influence and engage your team, work with them more effectively. With school, raising young people who are more successful in learning in life. And not only that, the best teachers seem to have really good relationships with their students. And then organizations, the ability to be able to tap into that high level of performance. The Oftentimes the most important relationship somebody has is with their manager, and the more effective that manager is, the more they can get from that person within the organization. And then from a healthcare perspective, just the ability to be able to deliver more effective patient care. And then obviously if you're able to create more joy, be happy, be more satisfied, especially at this time where a lot of us are spending a lot more time at home, that just makes for a better life. So, what is emotional intelligence? It's really the ability to understand and control your own feelings and to understand the feelings of others and to react to them in a suitable way. So, it's really being able to be in some level of control of your emotions and not just fly off the handle and handle situations appropriately. I want to walk through a few myths. I know I covered this last time, but I think these are some things that are pretty important. People think of emotional intelligence as just being empathetic and understanding others' emotions. It's it's really about your level of awareness. If you have strong emotional intelligence, you'll understand how to regulate your own emotions. And I think that's important when you're working with people, especially if you own businesses, and whether you're in service or in consumer, you're working with the public, and being able to do this can make the difference between helping your business grow or impacting your business negatively. Myth number 2, emotional intelligence is the most important indicator of professional success. So you'll see a lot of studies that talk about emotional intelligence, how it impacts business. The reality of it is that functional technical, excuse me, knowledge is always the foundational requirement for any industry. I know that a lot of you can think of people that that have very poor emotional intelligence, and their businesses are thriving. We can all think of people. I mean, all you have to do is pick up the newspaper, pick up your phone, and you hear about somebody that has done something from a negative perspective in when we talk about emotional intelligence, and they're doing extremely well. I was doing this webinar last week, and that question came up of why. Well, there's so many different components of emotional intelligence. And I think in some cases, people are strong in some areas and weak in other areas. So for example, if you have somebody that's very, very driven and outspoken, so the positive side of that is those folks will speak up when somebody needs to speak up and take charge when somebody needs to take charge. The downside of that is they can be like a bull in a china cabinet. So there's pros and cons to both sides. Emotional intelligence has a lot of different parts in a lot of different areas, but I think it's one of the reasons why you see people that on the surface, they don't seem like they have very strong emotional intelligence and they continue to do well. And I think the other part of that is the reality of it is they have good functional technical knowledge. If you're very good at what you do, people are going to seek you out. And then myth number 3, that emotional intelligence is innate. You either have it or you don't. And fortunately, it's something that you can learn. You can modify your behavior. I look at, for example, Steve Jobs. I don't know how many of you read his biography. I know earlier on in the book, it was a book I wanted to put down because I thought to myself, man, Steve Jobs is really a jerk. And as I read more into the book, it was clear that there are some elements of his personality that he worked on. That, coupled with the skills that he had in IT and just for design, those are some of the things that made Apple, such a great company. So here's another opportunity for a poll. What do you see? And I don't know if I did this before, so if I did, I apologize, because you might figure out the right answer. But if you would text to 22333 and then text my name and then type in whether you think it's A, B, or C, D, or E. So I have 2 results so far. So yes, some people think that he is menacing. So actually, in this circumstance, he's actually neutral. And part of it is that we're wired to see the negative thing, the negative way that people see the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about that a little shortly, but I want to tee up a video for you that's going to talk a little bit about bias, and you'll begin to understand why bias is something that's impactful. So here you go.
Our brain is hardwired to trust what's familiar and be suspicious of what's unfamiliar. It's a basic survival instinct that's helped keep us safe for thousands of years.
We unconsciously sort things like familiar versus unfamiliar, same versus different, them versus us. Here's a test. How do you feel about people who own a handgun?
Don't attend church. Vote for the other candidate.
Are on welfare. Don't eat meat. Have tattoos.
Don't believe in marriage.
Drive an electric car.
Didn't go to college.
Don't speak English. Curse.
Are over 6.
Are disabled. Drive the speedboat.
Love cats.
Love dogs. Can you feel your brain sorting people into groups? Was there a little them versus us happening? It can happen unconsciously.
There's some reason why we have these unconscious biases. You talk a little bit about the science. Our brain has 2 operating systems. One is fast, looks for quick and easy solutions. It can be very irrational, is often wrong. And then the other one is logical, slow, effortful, and cautious. There's been a lot of research in this area. We like to think of it as decision fatigue. I know that I believe in Charles Duhickey's book around habits, they looked at judges that were doing parole hearings, and what they found is that the closer it got to lunch, the more that the number of paroles that were granted dropped. And the rationale behind that is it takes a lot of effort for our brain. Our brain uses a great deal of energy. So we're actually not at our optimal performance just before lunch. It's one of the reasons why the first thing in the morning, it's better to focus on the most important task that you have, because you have the most level of energy and your brain has a great deal of glucose to utilize. And so our brain takes shortcuts, and the shortcuts it takes basically is it looks for quick, easy solutions. the challenge with that is that it can often be wrong. And so the other logical, slow, more cautious part of our brain, it takes a lot of energy and it ends up taking a lot more time. So, you know, we go back to this negativity bias. Our brain takes these shortcuts, and will have a tendency to see the world as we know it, and it's a safety mechanism. One of the rationales behind that, back in the caveman times, you know, if you saw a saber-toothed tiger and you didn't react very quickly, then there were going to be problems. Then our emotions and behaviors are regulated by our amygdala as well as our prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the thinking portion of the brain. The amygdala is that part of the brain where it controls a lot of our emotion. And so we do things almost with just a reaction. And so we can actually train our brain to utilize the prefrontal cortex and kind of wait and kind of manage through some of these challenges. So I'm going to do another poll here. This poll here are just some of the amygdala challenges that impact you most. So I just want to get a sense of, what are your triggers? What triggers you? Is it lack of respect? Is it unfair treatment, underappreciated, not heard, unrealistic deadlines? And I know that these may not necessarily be all of the ones that are out there, but they are ones that, in a work setting, these are the things that create issues and challenges at work with not only yourself, but also your employees, or even if you're working with your peers. A lack of respect, unfair treatment, unrealistic deadlines. And there's no right or wrong answer for these. These are just really how you feel and what impacts you. So I see here a lack of respect is something that impacts a lot of people. And I probably would say lack of respect is one that impacts me. So what does this mean in the workplace? Well, it means that people feel threatened. They focus on what's going wrong versus what's going right. They feel overwhelmed, and it damages relationships. And unfortunately, these, we like to call them a amygdala hijack. If you get hijacked at work, it can create some big issues. And especially if you're in charge, if you have one of these outbursts, it will damage relationships. And I believe I talked to you last week around a situation in regards to somebody that worked on my team that was impacted very, very negatively by a senior manager, and that person was never the same. And so they're in a different role within the organization, and probably will never get promoted. And if they left, it wouldn't be a surprise, but it would be a loss of talent. And it's one of the reasons why emotional intelligence can be so important, because if you lose employees because of relationships and they're very talented, the cost of replacing an employee can be so significant. And then especially in a world where the unknown is, do I onboard a new person in person? Do I do it virtually? Can I do it virtually? Am I going to be able to build a relationship with this person virtually? So there are a lot of things that come into play when we start talking about turnover and those things being triggered because of relationships within the workplace. We talked a little bit last time about the TRACOM emotional intelligence model. So there are several different models. There's Talent Smart. Daniel Goleman has a model. You know, basically these measurements focus on some very similar items, you know, pieces around self-awareness, self-control, motivation, self-regulation, and some of those items. So I don't know that it really makes a difference about what tool and what resource that you use. I think ultimately, if you're able to find some area where you need some level of development and you can work on that area, or even if you have an area where you have a towering strength where you can work on that area and build out your expertise. I just took an assessment just recently with some coaching that I was receiving, and found that I had a high level of self-awareness. So that's an area where I could probably spend more time and figure out, how can I use that self-awareness to accelerate, with what I do, and how does that help me with building a business? So those are just some ways that you can think in terms of how to use these different types of assessments. The other recommendation I would have, you can do an emotional intelligence assessment by yourself, and you can, do your own assessment. My recommendation is that you try to do one that has a 360, where you get feedback from other people, because if you can do that, you can tease out maybe a few areas where you can build some skill there. So that would be my recommendation in regards to that. So Abraham Lincoln is known as somebody that had a high degree of emotional intelligence. In fact, he's probably the most hated person in the 1860s as the president of the United States. And this is a letter that he wrote to General George Meade. This was a couple of weeks after the Gettysburg Address. And he was very upset with General Meade. So Eric, I'm sorry, I'm going to backtrack here shortly. Eric had a question around EI self-assessments to use. Obviously, Eric, from my perspective, because I'm certified through TRACOM, I probably encourage you to use the TRACOM 360. That being said, though, there are some other tools that are out there. Talent Smart has a pretty good tool. I know in their book that they have around emotional intelligence, there's an assessment at the end. Daniel Goleman, I believe in his book, he may actually have an assessment. So some of these assessments are self-assessments that you can get through the book, or if you want to talk to me after, because I have a couple of different vehicles. One is the TRACOM assessment. There's also an assessment that I have on emotional intelligence that has some AI behind it. So, there are different price points for these. So if you want to, speak to me afterwards, then I can let you know. And anybody else that may be interested in having an actual assessment, that's something I can help you with. In regards to General Meade, this is a letter that was written to him. Now, here's the thing. He never sent this letter to General Meade. This was found after Lincoln's death. Now, to give you a little context, this is only a portion of the letter. The full letter starts out by talking about George Meade, some of the things that he had done that were positive. The bottom part of the letter is a lot more negative, and he was very upset that the war could not have ended. And the reason he wrote this letter is because Meade was going to resign, and he had heard through the grapevine that Lincoln was upset with him. So there's actually several letters or several things to think about. I think from a history standpoint, get the full story, because when you read the story online, people will have you believe that this was the letter, and it was not the letter. It doesn't give all the context. But at 2 points. One, usually you try not to give feedback when you're angry, because it can have negative consequences. And I think it's why Lincoln did not send this letter, because he was still angry and upset. And it was to some degree his raw emotions, and that can be very, very negative. I think the other thing, though, and I think these are things to think about from an emotional intelligence standpoint, if you have an issue with somebody, ultimately, I think you're better off having a conversation with them at some point. Now, back in the day, it wasn't like you could necessarily pick up the phone and talk to somebody immediately. They communicated a lot by letter, so it would take some time to get a letter. So you're talking about wrote the letter July 14th. Maybe he doesn't get this letter until the end of July, or maybe the first week of August. But somehow or another, word had escaped that Lincoln was not happy with him. And if you think in terms of when you work with your team or work with some of your people, you may not be happy with somebody, or if you're not happy with a peer, that word gets around. or some kind of way or another, and it permeates the organization and it creates toxicity. So I would argue and say that when you have challenges and issues with somebody, you figure out how to have the conversation, even if that means you need to role play and you need to practice with somebody to figure out how those words are going to come across. So I think there's two lessons there to be learned when you talk about emotional intelligence. I think from Lincoln's perspective, there was a level of self-awareness to know that he should not send that letter, because at the time he was still pretty upset. Now, mind you, he had just given the Gettysburg Address a couple of weeks earlier, and the number of deaths that had occurred on both sides. So he wanted this war prosecuted so that he could end this war as very quickly as possible. So we'd love to hear from you, chats, thoughts, comments in regards to this portion in regards to Lincoln, or if you want me to pull you off of mute, if anybody had any comments. So from Liz, best advice she ever got was to wait 24 hours before responding to something you're angry about. And I think that's a pretty good rule, because you can think about it objectively. The other thing is sometimes when you wait, the sting of it, or it's maybe is not as important as you thought it was. And then from William, with email and phone, it's a challenge to restrain from reacting to bad situations. And I think that's the challenge definitely with email, because sometimes you write a note and you have no context of the email. There's a manager I used to work with. He sent every email he had in big bold letters and caps, and everybody used to think he was always angry. And if you pick up the phone and give somebody the business, it's that amygdala trigger and challenge. And then Amanda basically said she liked the idea of writing a letter, email, and not sending it, which is what Abe Lincoln did. And that is a recommendation that some people have, is that you get it out on paper and then you just put it away. So it allows you to think about what your thoughts are, and at the same time, not blast the person, but get through your kind of emotional temper tantrum. And I think it's okay to be angry, be upset. This is not about, emotional intelligence is not about holding anger. It's about how to self-regulate and think about how you can use it in an effective way and express it in an effective way without hurting somebody else, with it getting in the way of what you're trying to accomplish from a business perspective, or even in your personal life. So I thought this was a cartoon I liked. For those of you that have children and parents, I thought that you could probably identify with this. Children are really good at pushing buttons. So I'll give you a few seconds to read this. And if you think it's funny, you can type haha in chat. All right, moving on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about self-regulation, and I'm going to go through a video here. I don't know how many of you have heard of the marshmallow experiment. So this was an experiment that was done at Stanford University in 1972. And what they did is they gave children between the ages of 4 and 5 a chance to either have one marshmallow and they could eat that marshmallow immediately, or if they waited, they could have another marshmallow for 2. And then on the backside of that experiment, what they did over the years is they actually measured how well and how effectively these children did in life. And so things like SAT scores, schooling, jobs, and things like that, those are things that they measured on the back end. And what they found is that children that were able to self-regulate or wait for that second marshmallow generally did better than children that were not able to. I wanted to just show you this quick clip. This is an experiment that's been run several times. And I just wanted to show you this clip to some of the gyrations and things that children, they basically did to get that second marshmallow.
Sure. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. So I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give me another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need
I laugh every time I see that video. Um, because it's just hilarious. So what they were, and somebody commented, it said they ate the marshmallows. So what they did find is that with intervention, you can teach self-regulation. And I think it just goes back to things like, goals that we have, diets are trying to do. This ability to self-control and self-regulate can make a difference. I mean, and I think clearly, this was an experiment. There are other things that are behind this. One of the things they talk about in habit formation are setting up positive triggers. For example, people that want to work out, putting your bedclothes next to your bed or sleeping in them if you're planning on running, because sometimes there are things that literally get in the way of you trying to accomplish what you want to try to accomplish. We talked a little bit about the amount of glucose it takes to make decisions. So decision fatigue and things like that do play into, at the end of the day, if you've had a hard day, you're more likely to eat poorly versus if you've given yourself an opportunity to take breaks throughout the day and feed. So those are things that do play into this, and they do play into some level of self-regulation. But I just wanted to share that with you because it does provide some insight into the self-regulation. Empathy is something that comes out a lot, your ability to be able to tune into others. Gallup has done several different surveys and assessments around empathy, and they talk about managers maybe not necessarily having empathy. I think in terms of empathy as being not only a feeling, but it's also a behavior. So I think ultimately, if you exhibit that behavior, it's going to help. So the question is, do you recognize the needs of your customers? And think from the perspective of a business, in running a business and increasing business, this can be very, very insightful. I like this situation here, this is Naomi Osaka and Coco Gauff during the US Open, I believe a year ago. Coco Gauff was upset. She had lost in straight sets. She was kind of the wonder of the world from a tennis perspective. I believe she's 15 years old, so she's very young. She's very upset. Naomi Osaka gave her the opportunity to share the stage with her, which people usually don't do, but she was able to put herself in Coco Gauff's shoes and understand the emotions. And a year before that, Naomi had won the U.S. I believe she had won the U.S. Open over Serena, and the crowd was booing. And Serena had been upset because there had been some bad calls, and Serena, at this point after the match, utilized kind of her good self and used some of her empathy to tell the crowd, wasn't Naomi's fault and that she won and that she should be celebrated. Now during the match, clearly the lioness came out, Serena, because she was very upset and she let the referee know. But I just wanted to share this with you because it is a portion of empathy. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about facial recognition, because oftentimes we will have conversations, or we'll see customers or see people that we know, and we'll know or notice something, or it'll trigger, but we don't necessarily respond. So your ability to be able to recognize some of these facial cues can be so important. And then especially since we're doing a lot more of these type of virtual calls, sometimes the only thing we have are people's facial expressions, and we don't have a lot of time to read those facial expressions to see what people are thinking. So I put together about 3 or 4 of these to see if you could identify them. Some of them are easy, some of them are not. So here, what do you think you see? Yeah, so I think everybody got this one, because this one is definitely anger. And how you can tell the eyebrows are down and together, the eyes glare, and then the narrowing of the lips. So what about this one? What do you see here? Oh, sorry. Surprise, fear. I have sadness. So this is actually surprise. I'm going to walk through this with you. So the eyebrows are raised, the eyes are widened, and the mouth is open. And I think the big thing is with the eyebrows are raised in the widening of the eyes. All right. So what is this one? Yeah. So this one is definitely contempt, and this is a big one, I think, because I think it says a lot, especially if you have a customer that has some level of contempt. I think that that's probably a pretty negative sign. I think probably more so than a lot of other ones. They say that in couples, when you see this, that means that relationship's not going too well. A couple of chats here. So yeah, so if you're having problems with the poll, if you just text 22333 and then my name, that'll allow you to answer these questions. And then what's this one here? Yeah, this one is definitely sadness. And here, drooping upper eyelids, losing focus in eyes, slight pull down of lips in the corner. So it's interesting because this is an emotion that what I've seen, with coworkers or different people, and sometimes it'll trigger immediately. And what will happen is you may not necessarily pay attention to it, or you pay attention to it, you just don't acknowledge it. You don't necessarily say anything. I think sometimes when we see these emotions, we will not acknowledge it at all. And I think especially in the virtual world, when we're looking at people on camera, it is a way to connect. It is a way to build some level of empathy with people, to recognize what their emotions are. And sometimes it's the only thing that you're going to get. And sometimes these micro expressions will happen very, very quickly. So you're having a conversation with somebody, and they may have a flash of anger or a flash of disgust. They may do some other, they may actually rub the back of their head or rub their neck. So usually when they do that, it's literally they're getting hot under the collar. There's a literal physical reaction. So a double clue like that will give some insight into that there's something that you probably need to address. So that's just some ways that facial recognition and even body language can help you with some of your customers, whether you're in a service industry or you're working one-on-one with people. And if let's say you're in a bank and people are coming in and they have their face mask on. Sometimes it can be very difficult to tell with some of those clues, but even still, you can really look at the eyes and get a sense of that. My guess is even when people have face masks on, you can tell when they're smiling or when they're not smiling. So from a social perspective, social skills are something that all of us need to have. And I did this picture of Oprah Winfrey because she falls in a lot of categories when it comes to emotional intelligence. I know that she's quite driven and she can be a taskmaster with her employees. I mean, obviously, you don't get to where she's been and make as much money as she's made by sitting on the sidelines. But one of the things that she's known for is being a master interviewer. She's able to build a rapport with people. She's able to talk to people, and she's able to get people to open up. And not only that, she has a huge influence. If you have a book or something that you've written and you ended up on Oprah's show, chances are that book was going to sell really well. Even if the book wasn't good, it was going to sell with Oprah's influence. And so I think that's really ultimately some level of emotional intelligence and kind of social status. There are a lot of things that are wrapped up there. But I think overall, people that have had some interaction with Oprah Winfrey would say that she's a very, very nice person, but she has a great story to tell from growing up as a child, not necessarily having all of the advantages to, one of the richest women in the world. I wanted to talk a little bit about the trust quotient. Ultimately, when we talk about emotional intelligence, a lot of what we're talking about is how do we create trust. There's the Speed of Trust that was written by Stephen Covey. And this is another book that was written. I can't remember the author. I just listened to this recently, but it is around the trust quotient. And there's some different pieces. So credibility, I think that goes back to your functional technical skills, your IQ, your reliability, your empathy, and then the level of self-interest. So credibility plus reliability plus empathy, and then to the degree of your self-interest. So the less that we focus on ourselves and the more that we focus on the other person, the more that we build our trust quotient. So I think that's an important piece, especially when you're thinking about from a business perspective. Relationships do make a difference. Or your ability to build trust, because sometimes when you have customers that come in, you don't see them that often. And so there are a lot of things that go into them wanting to do business with you. Literally, it's be the best with others. I think that's a literal thing. Now, it's interesting, and I'll just give you this example. I belong to several different banks. I'm in the process of relocating and not moving far, but one of the banks is basically the local bank, and I don't think there's actually a branch to where I'm moving. And so to drive over the Doylestown, while it's not a long way, it's long enough for it to be a pain. And I did not have mobile checking. And my thought was, well, I'll just change banks. So I went into the bank literally the other day, and the teller uh, asked me, as I made a deposit, asked me if I had mobile banking, and I said I didn't, and they told me that they could get that set up. And I made the decision I was going to stay with the bank, and it was a simple thing, but it made a big difference. And it was just gets back to this trust quotient. This is the teller, build a relationship with over a short amount of time. Pretty much they have done what they said they were going to do. They called me yesterday, literally, to follow up with the mobile checking, and it'll make life easy for me because I won't have to drive over to the bank. But it is a specific example of somebody exhibiting some level of emotional intelligence, asking a question that was important. Now, mind you, I probably hadn't seen this person in the last 2 or 3 months with COVID, and I ended up going through drive-through and had this conversation at the window. But it's a specific example about how emotional intelligence and customer service and those things really make a big difference in keeping customers. Harder to get a new customer than it is to keep one that you have and then begin to grow your business with them. So I think that's a great example of this trust quotient equation, utilizing all these different pieces, them understanding that, gee, they probably don't want to drive to Doylestown and spend a half an hour of their time just so they can deposit a check. So at this point, we're coming down to the end here. We've got about 8 minutes. So what questions do you have of me? I've paused on this page because I have some different resources of some folks. Vanessa Van Edwards wrote a book called Captivate, and it talks about different things that you can do in interacting with people, building relationships. Joe Navarro is a former FBI agent that has done several books on body language. Amy Cuddy, renowned psychologist that's written some books on body language and things that you can do. And then Paul Ekman is an expert on micro expression. So there's a lot of literature about him and from him. And then neurolinguistic programming is a program that talks about a variety of things. I think it's actually pretty interesting because it talks about, ways that you can build rapport with people, not only eye movements and those type of things, but just things like how people talk, how fast they talk, pacing, their language patterns. Those are things that basically that it focuses on. So I think that's a really good starting point if you're trying to build skill around building relationships and building rapport, especially in sales and service settings. And then Daniel Goleman, I like to say that he's probably the person that has had the most influence around emotional intelligence. And he's written several books in regards to emotional intelligence. So one of the questions is, how can you tell if an engineer is an extrovert? So this is actually an interesting question. So William, I don't know if you're familiar with social styles. I mean, I think you can go to social styles, see if they are, driver, influencer, stable, or conscientious. Or sometimes we like to say colors, because for colors, it's easier for people to understand colors. So if you say that somebody's a blue, they're more analytical. They're red, that they're a driver. If they're green, they're more amiable. And then if they're a high I, they're very outgoing. So I think that's only part of the story, though. Susan Cain has written a book called Quiet, and she talks about introversion versus extroversion. So in her book, according to her definition, introversion is you need to be by yourself to recharge. And extroversion, basically, you need people to recharge. And I think that it could be very difficult sometimes to tell, because some people hide it. I'm actually an introvert because I need to be by myself to recharge. There are people that I know that I would say they're high I personality, There was a guy I was in Toastmasters with. He sells insurance. He's definitely high, life of the party. And he says, if you do a party at his house, when he's done, he's done. He will literally leave everybody there because he has to be by himself. And if you met him, you would say there's no earthly way that he's an introvert. There's another woman, Shailene Johnson. If you've listened to any of her podcasts, oh boy, she's really, really high energy. She's definitely a high or a yellow. But she says she's an introvert. She has to be by herself to recharge. And she enjoys doing the podcast when she's in a room locked away by herself. So I think there can be difficulty. I think we think in terms of introversion and extroversion in regards to how people present themselves. So it can be a little tricky. Yeah, Liz, the power introvert, Susan Cain. Oh, well, if he talks to you and he looks at his shoes, yeah, he's probably introvert and actually may be shy. So I think we get shyness and introversion mixed together. So you can be an introvert and not shy, but you can also be shy and it adds on to your introversion. So that's what I would probably say. Other questions? I put together an emotional intelligence guide. It's really more of a workbook. So if you want to download that, you can actually hit this link here. It'll take you to a landing page. It'll just ask you for your name and email address, and then it'll allow you to download a PDF. And there are some different exercises and things that you can do to build out your emotional intelligence. And there are some things that it'll do just to kind of reinforce just some of the things that we did here on this webinar. Any other questions, comments? So I appreciate everybody's participation. Again, if you're interested in an assessment or some coaching in regards to emotional intelligence, or you feel like this would be something that would be beneficial for your organization, more than happy to have a conversation. So if there are no other questions, I am going to I guess I'll hang around for a few minutes, but I think at this point, that's all I have, unless there are other questions. So really thank everybody for their participation. Really appreciate it. All right. I'm going to sign off. Do you have any questions, Eric? All right. Have a good one. All right. Thanks.